A family of 7 moved into a 1,000-year-old castle, then strange things began to happen. The eldest daughter, Shirley, had a litter of newborn kittens. She ran over with a bottle to feed them, but when she got closer, she found that almost all the kittens were dead. She sadly picked up the one kitten that was still breathing. But the weird things didn't stop there. At night, the youngest daughter, Nell, was sleeping soundly when suddenly, strange noises came from above. She opened her eyes. The youngest son, Luke, went to explore the basement. He shone his flashlight around continuously, but then a withered hand suddenly reached out from the darkness. Immediately after, a skeleton lunged at him. The little boy was so scared that he instantly wet his diaper. Why were there so many evil spirits in the castle? And would the children be able to escape unharmed? This is a TV show that ranks 6th on global trending lists and is an American horror film with an extremely explosive reputation. In the wilderness, there is a 1,000-year-old castle that looks very eerie. Just looking at its appearance makes people afraid to approach it. Inside the castle, it was dilapidated and covered in dust. No one would want to live in such a bizarre place. But Hugh was an atheist and insisted on moving in with his wife and children. He could never have imagined that this decision would cost his family dearly. On the first night after moving in, Nell trembled and pleaded with her father not to leave, because she saw a woman with a crooked neck standing by the bed. Hugh thought his daughter wasn't yet well adapted to the new environment, and he didn't take it seriously. He simply said, "Just go to sleep, dear," and left the room. But after her father left, Nell could no longer sleep, and she had to tightly close her eyes, forcing herself to fall asleep quickly. The next night, Nell refused to leave the couch and told her parents that she wouldn't sleep in the bedroom tonight. Her parents had to agree. However, not long after Nell fell asleep, she heard strange noises and opened her eyes. Why was the evil spirit persistently haunting Nell? Later, Nell told her mother about seeing the head-tilting woman, but her mother thought Nell had a rich imagination. One night, however, Hugh suddenly burst into his son's room, woke up the eldest son, Stephen, and carefully turned the doorknob, looking as if he was afraid of waking something terrible. After confirming it was safe, he picked up his son and rushed out. Stephen was confused by this sudden situation, not knowing what his father was up to. After hurriedly getting into the car, he saw his younger siblings, but after searching for a while, he couldn't find their mother. The children anxiously called out, trying to find their mother, Olivia, but Hugh started the car and drove off, saying, "Olivia has completely changed." The next day, the police called Hugh to the station to inform him that Olivia had taken her own life in the castle. They then pressed him to see if he knew any hidden truths. But Hugh didn't answer anything, just telling the police to investigate as they wished. From that day on, Hugh and the children never returned to the castle, and Olivia's death became an unsolved mystery. Time passed quickly, and the children grew up, yet they still didn't understand why their mother had died, nor did they comprehend why their father had fled the castle that night. Now Stephen, like Hugh, didn't believe in ghosts or spirits. After all, he had never seen a ghost with his own eyes. He even thought that when they lived in the castle, his younger siblings said that seeing ghosts must have been a sign of their mental issues. However, Stephen, although he didn't believe in spirits, used his experiences in the castle as material to write a horror novel. Unexpectedly, this novel made him famous, but now, he had exhausted all the material from the castle. He could only run around looking for new material. In order to find material, he almost always stayed overnight at the homes of others. One day, Stephen went to a woman's house. The woman told him that her husband had recently died in a car accident. It had been pouring rain that day, and since then, she had been haunted by an evil spirit. Every night when she tried to sleep, she felt as if cold, icy rain was hitting her face, and the sound of a piercing horn echoed in her ears. She believed it was her husband's ghost causing trouble. Although the woman didn't seem to be rambling, Stephen still didn't believe in such supernatural things. Just then, Nell called. Stephen thought it was probably nothing important and hung up the phone. Continuing with his work, Shirley also received Nell's call, but at that moment, she was in a meeting and didn't pick up it. Afterwards, she called her sister back, but after several attempts, no one answered. Shirley went back to her own tasks. Meanwhile, Hugh was sleeping soundly when a strange sound came from suddenly beside his pillow. He quickly turned over to check. Fortunately, what just happened was only a nightmare. Just then, Nell called. She frantically said that the head-tilting woman had appeared again. Hugh sensed that his daughter's condition was quite unusual and hurriedly comforted her, telling her to stay put and not go anywhere. Hugh seemed to think of something and quickly got up to pack his things. But he didn't know that Nell had already arrived at the castle. Strangely, they hadn't been back in 20 years, yet the castle was lit up. Even more bizarre, as Nell stepped into the castle, she began to dance gracefully. Her siblings were all awakened by nightmares at the same time. At this moment, Stephen suddenly received a call. Hugh told him to stay home and not run around, as Nell might come to him for help. Upon hearing this, he quickly packed his things and rushed back. On the way, he saw Luke holding a camera and a tablet, but he should have been in a rehab center. Stephen immediately understood that his brother was probably trying to steal something to trade for drugs. He helplessly took out his wallet and called Luke over. After handing over the money, he headed home unexpectedly. When Stephen turned on the light, he saw Nell. He thought it was Luke who had let her in and didn't think much of it. After putting down his things, he asked Nell what had happened. But just as he finished speaking, he received another call from his father. Hugh choked as he said that Nell had returned to the castle and that she had committed suicide for some reason. Stephen was stunned upon hearing this, and he was left speechless. He turned around and saw his sister appear right in front of him. In the next moment, in the blink of an eye, Nell just disappeared. Looking at the empty living room, Stephen's legs went weak, and he couldn't calm his emotions for a long time. But it was clear that all the problems stemmed from that castle. 20 years ago, 2 children were playing outside the castle. Shirley ran off with a camera, leaving only Luke behind. But he suddenly waved his hand toward the front, and it was clear that his expression was very serious, as if he had seen something terrifying. Shirley was taking pictures of the scenery around the castle with her camera. She unexpectedly arrived at the graveyard. This was where the former owners of the castle were buried. Shirley took a group photo of them. Suddenly, a cat's meow came from nearby. Shirley walked into a storage room, only to find a litter of newborn kittens inside. She was thrilled and immediately pressed the shutter. Unexpectedly, the flash revealed a grotesque face. She was filled with suspicion and raised her camera. Again, while talking with the gardener, Hugh heard a scream and hurried to search for his daughter. Then, he searched for a long time with a flashlight, only to find that what his daughter saw was just a mask. Now the truth was revealed, and Shirley finally felt relieved. Next, Shirley expressed her desire to take the kittens home to raise them, because there were wild dogs all around the castle. She was worried that the kittens might get hurt. The gardener, upon hearing this, questioned her, saying that there were no wild dogs around at all. However, Hugh said that his children said they could hear the sounds of wild dogs howling every night. Since Hugh had said so, the gardener chose not to argue any further. Afterwards, Shirley took all the kittens back to feed them. The next morning, the first thing she did after getting up was to check on the kittens. She found that one of the kittens had died. Though she felt immense sorrow, Shirley still went to the yard with her parents to prepare a proper burial for the kitten. However, Hugh had already dug the grave, but Shirley suddenly noticed that the kitten seemed to be breathing. She excitedly picked up the kitten and began to stroke it. Shirley was scared and let out a loud scream, but fortunately, there were several other kittens in the house. A few days later, Shirley was getting ready to feed the kittens. When she touched the kittens, she found that they were all cold. She kept searching and finally found the one kitten that still had a faint breath. The incident with the kittens left a psychological scar on Shirley, but with her mother's guidance, she gradually began to feel better. However, strange events in the castle continued one after another. At night, Theo was getting ready for bed. Suddenly, loud knocking sounds came from beside her. She went to Shirley's room to ask her why she was constantly banging on the wall. Shirley replied that she hadn't done anything, as they were both puzzled about what was happening. Suddenly, they heard a series of banging noises near their ears, and the whole room began to shake. Terrified, they hugged each other tightly and screamed loudly. At this moment, Hugh rushed in after hearing the noise. However, strangely, the shaking abruptly stopped, facing his two daughters' accounts. Their father reassured them that it was nothing serious and that it was probably just some bricks falling off due to the old house's long-term neglect. As he spoke, he walked over to the two girls.
It's
Shirley was so frightened that she nearly had a heart attack. Just then, the eldest brother called her to inform her that Nell had passed away. Shirley hurried to the morgue to see her sister's body. As she was a mortician, she just wanted to see her sister one last time. However, after careful consideration, she suggested that they shouldn't tell Luke about this, but just after she said that, she was met with opposition from Theo. Theo said everyone had attended Nell's wedding except for Luke. If he wasn't even allowed to see his sister one last time, he would definitely regret it for the rest of his life. It turned out that Luke often went into fits due to his mental disorder. At that time, Shirley was afraid he would disrupt Nell's wedding, so she gave him money to get him out of the way. Just then, it was time to prepare her sister's appearance. Shirley looked at her sister's body, tears streaming down her face. Suddenly, Nell's mouth began to move. Shirley was startled and stumbled backward, reminded of the time she took care of kittens as a child. She steadied herself and approached to check the situation, but the spider she had seen earlier was nowhere to be found. She guessed that she might be experiencing a hallucination. Quickly, she adjusted herself to complete her task. Just as she was about to close the door and leave, she caught a glimpse, only to see an additional body next to Nell, and it sat up as if coming back to life. When the dim light shone on the woman's face, Shirley recognized her as their mother, who had died many years ago. Their mother was holding a box containing the bodies of the kittens. Terrified, Shirley hurriedly turned on the light, but their mother vanished. Shirley kept quiet about it. After that, she returned home and went to sleep in her bedroom. However, strange things happened again. In the living room stood the eternal home model left by their mother. Unexpectedly, the light inside flickered twice. Olivia had once told the children that if the lights in the house flickered twice, it meant that the children were coming home. Theo was working at the hospital as a psychologist. Due to her special abilities, she could clearly sense the painful pasts of her patients. It turned out that Theo could activate her powers just by touching things. At that time, the children were playing in the castle. Luke excitedly told her that he had found something he had never seen before. Theo looked at the old horn and reached out to touch it. Then she led her siblings upstairs. Sure enough, they found the other end of the horn. Theo said that she saw the purpose of this object. This bedroom had once housed a person who was bedridden, and they could only use the horn to communicate with others. Of course, Theo's abilities were not limited to this. She could also sense other people's emotions through touch. One day, Luke was being mischievous in the castle again. He even crawled into the kitchen's lift. The nanny rushed over in a panic and scolded Luke. Theo, who had come in for a drink, quickly went to check the situation. At the moment she touched the nanny, she sensed that the nanny was not actually angry, but was worried that her brother might get into trouble. However, despite Theo's impressive abilities, she still could not escape the disturbances of unknown forces in the castle. At that time, Theo was in the lounge watching TV and exercising. Suddenly, the doorknob turned oddly. She quickly crouched down to look through the crack in the door, but there was nothing on the other side. So, she didn't think much of it and continued her workout. The next day, Luke, curious about what was below the lift, called his sister to come to the kitchen. Theo was happy to help and pressed the down button for her brother. Soon, Luke arrived at the castle's basement, but he had never heard his parents mention it. The basement was covered in dust, indicating that it had been abandoned for a long time. At this moment, Theo took out the flashlight she had prepared in advance, but it didn't work at a crucial moment. and the light began to flicker uncontrollably. In a daze, Luke seemed to see a withered hand.
Theo!
A terrifying skeleton rushed towards him, and he kept shouting loudly out of fear. Their parents heard the noise and came to the kitchen, and hurriedly rescued Luke. Fortunately, Luke was only left with torn clothes, and he had not sustained any injuries, but he kept shouting that there were monsters down below. Their parents did not believe him at all, thinking he was just rambling out of fear. However, after Theo touched her brother's body, she instantly realized that what he said was true. To find out what Luke had seen, she followed the hidden staircase down to the basement. However, after searching for a long time, she didn't find any monsters, but it wasn't entirely fruitless. She successfully found several ledgers inside. Afterwards, she showed the items to Olivia. After looking at them, she understood the purpose of the basement. It turned out that long ago, making alcohol without permission could land you in jail. Therefore, the owner of the ancient castle secretly built a basement specifically for winemaking. Now the truth was revealed. Olivia reached out to comfort her daughter, telling her not to think too much. Unexpectedly, she discovered that her daughter had special abilities. She instantly realized that Theo had inherited her own powers. In order for her daughter to lead a normal life, the next day, Olivia brought a pair of gloves for her daughter to wear and instructed her to never use her abilities or tell anyone about it. However, Olivia passed away later. As Theo grew up, she began to use her abilities wisely and eventually became a skilled psychologist. One day, she received a young child as a patient. The child said that there was a Mr. Smiley in her home. Theo provided psychological counseling to the little girl. In the evening, she was getting ready for bed when suddenly something pulled the blanket off her. She suspiciously got up to check the situation. The Mr. Smiley she had just encountered had bizarrely vanished. At this moment, someone was knocking at the door. When Theo opened the door, to her surprise, it was her second sister. Shirley informed her about Nell's death, which led to their later argument about whether to tell Luke. However, Theo simply couldn't face her sister's body and made up an excuse to leave. Then she went to the patient's home. Following the guidance of the little girl's parents, she found the room where Mr. Smiley appeared. She used her abilities to touch each piece of furniture, and finally, when she touched the sofa, she felt a wave of pain, so she lay down on the sofa. To her surprise, she saw a strange pattern on the ceiling. She understood that this was the Mr. Smiley that the little girl had mentioned. Immediately after, she decisively called the police and told them to take the girl's stepfather away immediately. It turned out that the stepfather was a bad person, often did lewd things to this girl when her mother wasn't at home. Now everything was finally revealed. After finishing all of this, Theo thought of her own sister again. Previously, she had been unable to face the death of her loved ones, but she knew that if she didn't find out what had happened to her sister, she would likely spend the rest of her life in regret. So she came to her sister Nell's body and gathered her courage to place her hand on her head. However, she seemed to see something very terrifying and stumbled backward, collapsing to the ground in tears. Afterward, she went to her second sister's house to drink away her sorrows, but Shirley was not at home. Her brother-in-law heard the noise and came out to check the situation. Just as he was about to ask Theo what had happened, she spoke first and reminded him to come up with an excuse in advance because Shirley had already discovered that he was hiding money. Luke was attending a political class in rehab, but he felt an unbearable itch all over. The reason he became an addict was closely related to his experiences in childhood. At that time, Luke was sleeping soundly when he was suddenly awakened by a strange noise, so he hurried outside to check the situation. Seeing a giant towering 5 meters tall in front of him, Luke quickly shut the door and hid under the bed. But the door to the room suddenly opened, and the giant floated in slowly. The giant scared Luke terribly. From that day on, he became increasingly distracted and anxious every day. To stop his suffering, he became uncontrollable after coming into contact with drugs. When his siblings learned about this, They immediately sent him to rehab. Luke completely refused to obey the rules and always tried to find ways to escape. Fortunately, he fell in love at first sight with a girl named Elisa inside. They encouraged each other, and although the process was painful, the outcome was ultimately positive. They endured 3 months. However, on the night of Nell's death, Luke suddenly sat up in bed, startled from his sleep, only to see his sister appearing in front of him. But his sister only said run, and then disappeared right there. The next day, the rehab center gathered everyone together to solemnly announce that Elisa had escaped the night before. Luke couldn't believe that she would leave, so he went to Elisa's dorm to search everywhere. He found a note that she had left behind, which said not to look for her. Luke still refused to believe that Elisa would just give up, so he called, hoping to seek his sister's help. However, after calling for a long time, no one answered. Then, he prepared to escape and search for Elisa himself, but on the way, he suddenly encountered a strangely dressed man who looked just like the giant from his childhood nightmares. A flood of memories rushed back to him because Luke could always see the giant when he was a child. He told his family about this, but everyone thought he was just playing a prank, so Luke confided in his friend Lily, but strangely enough, no one else had ever seen Lily except for Luca. One day, when Olivia was cleaning at home, she found a hat and a box of buttons and gave them to the 2 youngest children to play with. After that, Luke and the others decided to test whether the horn was connected. Then, Nell went upstairs, took out 3 buttons, and dropped them into the horn. However, Luke downstairs was completely confused because only 2 buttons fell out. They thought the remaining button was stuck, but just as they finished speaking, the button fell out. Not only that, a deep voice also came from within, which seemed to be calling the nanny upstairs. Luke thought someone upstairs was playing a prank, so he hurriedly rushed up to check the situation. To his surprise, the room was completely empty. He remembered that his third sister had said the horn could transmit messages, so he quickly leaned in to tell his sister what was happening. But the next second, a ghostly face suddenly appeared on the horn. That night, even more terrifying events occurred. It was about the giant who had appeared earlier, but he was looking for Luke, just to pick up something that belonged to him, which was the gentleman's hat that Olivia had found. Luke was terrified that the giant would haunt him again. Fortunately, he did find Elisa in the park. After calming Elisa down, Luke called the rehab center, but they said they were unwilling to accept the 2 of them. Anyone who escaped was considered to have given up. Luke had to seek help from his eldest brother. When he arrived, he found that only his sister-in-law was at home, and the eldest brother and his wife had already separated due to their broken marriage. Luke felt helpless about this situation. He had to ask for his eldest brother's current address, but his eldest brother wasn't home either, so he used his skills to open the door. Since he didn't have a penny to his name, to find a place for him and Elisa to stay, he could only seek help from his eldest brother. Then he took some valuable items, but just as he stepped out, he ran into his eldest brother, who thought his brother was in trouble again. Angrily, he pulled out some money, and then, Luke excitedly took the money to find Elisa. She gave him a sweet kiss, just as he was lost in the thought of winning her affection. Elisa said she needed to go to the restroom first, but after waiting for a long time, she didn't return. Luke realized he might have been tricked, so he quickly checked his pockets and, unsurprisingly, the money was gone. Now he had to spend the night outside, but the most troubling part was that the giant was still following him. Luke was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat to confront the fear deep within him. He spent a long time mentally preparing before turning his head. To his shock, the giant had transformed into the appearance of his mother. Before Luke could react, the figure opened its eyes, blinding Luke with its brightness. When the blinding light faded, Luke found that his mother had vanished without a trace. In her place was his eldest brother, who had come driving. He mentioned that Nell had ended her life, but Luke believed it was the work of the crooked neck lady. His sister had mentioned this before, but no one in the family believed her. Moreover, no one was willing to believe that he could see the giant. 20 years ago in the castle, the family had joyfully moved in, but that night, Nell encountered a terrifying female ghost. Although they later escaped the castle, the damage inflicted by the crooked neck lady was too great, leading her to develop a severe mental illness. She couldn't sleep without medication. Later, her eldest brother took her to see a psychologist, and they hit it off. Soon, they were married. Nell's condition improved over time. Just when she thought she would be happy forever, Nell experienced sleep paralysis again. Her husband noticed that she was having an episode and thought to turn on the light and get her medication, but he stumbled and fell to the ground, losing consciousness. To check on her husband, Nell gritted her teeth and crawled to him, only to find that it was all in vain. Later, the coroner said that her husband had died from an acute illness, but Nell knew that his death was related to the crooked neck lady. However, Nell still needed to undergo psychological treatment. The doctor was experienced after many years in practice, and he didn't believe in ghosts at all. The doctor suggested that Nell go back to the castle to confront her fears. His words pulled Nell back into her childhood memories. She remembered a day when her mother flew into a rage, blaming her for scribbling on the walls and tearing the wallpaper. The reason was that her name was written on the wall. Nell felt very wronged, but her mother left in anger without listening to her explanation. Then her third sister came over. To find out whether her sister was lying, she used her abilities to touch the wall. She discovered that the writing on the wall was indeed not done by Nell. Then the third sister pulled down the nearby wallpaper, and it read, "Welcome home." Perhaps everything is predestined in some way. She should have returned long ago to resolve her inner conflicts. However, she was still unsure, so she went to find her siblings. Everyone was busy with their own things. Finally, she waited for Luke to arrive, but he brought drugs with him, saying that he was about to enter rehab soon, so he was hiding out here for now. Nell felt very sad to see her brother like this. At this moment, it started pouring rain outside. With tears in her eyes, she looked ahead, only to find the crooked neck lady standing in the rain. She hurried back home and threw all the medication into the toilet, because she had been very clear-headed just now, yet she could still see the crooked neck lady, leading her to suspect that the medication was problematic. Immediately after, she ran to find her third sister to vent her frustrations. Her sister immediately scolded her, questioning why she gave Luke money to buy flour, without the trust and care of family. Combined with the blow of her husband's death, Nell ultimately felt hopeless, deciding to return to the castle to heal her unfortunate life. However, on the way, she chose to stay at a hotel first, which was the place where her father had taken them during their escape long ago. She was about to rest for a while, but the feeling of suffocation suddenly returned. She wasn't sure why her youngest brother was stuck to the wall. Suddenly, the doorknob began to shake violently. The next second, young Hugh walked in. He called Nell to come out and chat, but soon their father was called away. Afterward, they learned about their mother's death. Nell woke up from her sleep, and she couldn't remember how she had fallen asleep, but thinking that Luke might be in danger, she called her eldest brother and the others. To her surprise, no matter who she called, the call was disconnected. Nell planned to go out to buy a bottle of water, but just as she opened the bottle to drink, the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. At first, she thought it was an electrical fault, so she prepared to go back to her room. Strange occurrences became more frequent, and she realized that she had to go to the castle immediately. Nell finally called her father and then drove to the castle. Strangely, there was no one inside, yet the lights were on. She walked in, suspiciously, only to find her siblings from childhood there. Her sister excitedly led her to find their mother. Olivia saw her writing "Welcome Home" on the wall. Seeing her mother, who had passed away many years ago, right in front of her, Nell's eyes were filled with tears. At this moment, her mother asked her to change into a dress for a ball. Immersed in happiness, Nell immediately complied. She then arrived at the hall on the first floor, where her grown siblings and parents were all present. What surprised her the most was that her husband was also standing in front of her. Excited, she stepped forward to dance with him, but it was all an illusion. In reality, she was spinning around alone like a madwoman. Soon, the music came to an end, and her husband vanished instantly. At the stairs sat a strange little girl. The identity of this child would be explained later. Suddenly, her mother appeared with the children, bringing snacks. Nell hurriedly followed them. After reaching the highest point, her mother gifted her a pendant. Nell quickly put it around her neck, but the next second, she found that the pendant had turned into a noose. Then, she appeared in front of herself at different ages, even seeing her deceased husband. It turned out that the crooked neck lady was actually herself. At this moment, everything finally came full circle. Everyone gathered for Nell's funeral. The eldest brother had always doubted the existence of ghosts, but for some reason, he began to see hallucinations, seeing the ghost of their deceased mother. Just then, Hugh rushed over. The funeral was officially starting. Everyone surrounded the body, covering their faces in grief. Nell's ghost was in the background. However, the children quickly began to argue, each trying to shift the blame. After all, they had all hung up on Nell's call before the incident. The only one who answered the call, their father, failed to prevent the tragedy. Stephen was very confused by this, not understanding why their father kept everything from them. That was how their mother had died. Now, their younger sister had followed in their mother's footsteps, yet their father remained unmoved. Shirley, hearing this, began to blame the eldest brother, thinking that if he hadn't insisted on writing a novel about the castle, their sister would have slowly forgotten her pain. Perhaps her condition wouldn't have worsened. Theo began to defend the eldest brother, believing that he wrote novels to make money. Besides, every household had benefited from his assistance. Shirley scolded Theo for being ungrateful, saying that if anything happened in the future, she shouldn't come to stay at her house. As soon as she said this, Shirley's husband surprisingly backed Stephen, arguing that their family's funeral home business had been struggling to make money, and if it weren't for the eldest brother, they probably wouldn't even have enough to eat. It turned out that the husband's secret stash of money was actually secretly supported by the eldest brother because he didn't want the strong-willed second sister to find out. Meanwhile, Theo, trying to help, suggested an affair, and Shirley, upon learning the truth, wept bitterly. She ran sadly to Nell's body, but then something unexpected happened. Someone had placed 2 buttons on the body, and suddenly, the surroundings plunged into darkness. Outside, the sound of thunder rumbled. Hugh, seeing this familiar scene, fell into memories. 20 years ago in the castle, he remembered that a similar situation occurred. Everyone immediately went to look for flashlights, but when they turned them on, they found Nell was gone. Olivia anxiously searched everywhere, completely unaware of the old woman who had mysteriously appeared on the bed. At this moment, there was a sound of a doorknob turning from a room. Thinking it was Nell, Olivia immediately followed the sound to check, but inside, there was a boy sitting in a wheelchair. Soon after, Hugh came looking for Olivia, but found only a discarded flashlight on the floor. He quickened his search and eventually found her in front of a window in the hallway. However, the next second,
Jesus Christ!
Strangely, when Hugh looked again, everything that had just happened seemed to have never occurred, and Olivia had returned to the spot where the flashlight was. Suddenly, a child's cries for help came from downstairs. The couple rushed downstairs, asking the children what the problem was. The children all said that there was a wild dog. Hugh wanted to check the kitchen after hearing this, but suddenly, Nell's voice came from nearby, and all the lights turned on at once. Everyone asked Nell where she had gone just now. She said she had been standing still the whole time, but it seemed that no one could see her at all. And now, thoughts returned to 20 years later. At this moment, Luke asked why their sister had lost hope, wondering if she was being haunted by something. The eldest brother, however, said that Nell and their mother both had serious mental illnesses. Hugh scolded Stephen for saying so, saying they didn't have mental illnesses at all. All their tragic experiences were the castle's doing. This led to a heated argument among them. Suddenly, a coffin bumped against the ground, and the lights returned to normal. Shirley wanted to grab some tools to tidy up for her sister, but instead ran into her husband and the third sister, struggling with each other. She was too upset to care about these matters now. so she angrily turned and left. After everything was done, everyone left. Just like the experiences from her childhood, she felt as if she had become invisible. Soon after, the day of Nell's burial arrived. Everyone was in complete despair and cried uncontrollably. When it was Luke's turn to sprinkle dirt, he unexpectedly saw his sister's ghost. He looked at her with disbelief.
Don't.
Luke looked at the person who was pulling him, recognizing her as his mother, who had passed away many years ago. Suddenly, the eldest brother rushed over and pulled him away, asking if he had a mental illness too. If so, he should get treatment soon, and definitely not lose hope like their mother and Nell. 20 years ago, due to a heavy rainstorm at that time, the old house's walls began to leak and mold appeared. Hugh, wanting to find the source, made his way to the basement. He chiseled a small hole in the wall and used a camera to check the situation. To his surprise, he saw that the inside was quite spacious, and it was covered in strange mold. It should be noted that this type of mold only grows on decaying flesh. He couldn't understand why the house's structure was like this. He checked the castle's blueprints, but strangely, this blueprint was exactly the eternal home that his wife had designed herself. Olivia felt innocent about this as well, stating that the blueprint for the eternal home was traced from the castle's plans. She didn't know why there would be changes. After this incident, Hugh finally realized that there was something wrong with the castle. Ever since they moved in, his wife had often done strange things. The most terrifying thing was that one night, she had even pressed a screwdriver against his neck. Later, he told the gardener about this incident. The gardener advised them to leave the castle quickly because his mother had gone insane while working there. He had to follow in his mother's footsteps and work at the castle, and he fell in love with the nanny. Not long after, the nanny became pregnant, but due to the illness of the current owner, Mrs. Hope, the nanny was too exhausted and miscarried. Later, whether it was the impact or some other reason, the nanny would often hear the sound of a baby crying at midnight, so they could no longer dare to live in the castle. Hugh found this horrifying upon reflection and thought about sending his wife to stay with relatives. He then went to the basement to break down a wall. To his surprise, he unearthed a skeleton and some masonry tools. He immediately contacted the police. They quickly identified the skeleton. The person was the former owner of the castle, John. At the time, everyone thought he was missing. Little did they know, he had chosen a grave for himself. One must say, he was quite ruthless. However, further investigation revealed issues. There were many scratches on the wall, indicating that he had actually attempted to escape. What hidden truths lay within it? 20 years later, although the family was not getting along well, they managed to give Nell a proper burial. Afterward, everyone prepared to part ways amicably. However, Shirley suddenly exclaimed, saying that her credit card and car keys were missing. Hugh guessed that it was probably Luke's doing, because he had rummaged through that bag, thinking he might have secretly gone to buy drugs again. They immediately went out to look for him. At this moment, Theo and Hugh were preparing to leave when they noticed a lot of mold on the carpet. The two of them curiously checked the situation, only to find themselves in Shirley's living room. Moreover, the floor was covered with scattered pieces of the Eternal Home model. Theo hurried over to tidy up, not understanding why there would be ghosts here. Theo screamed in fright. The ghost eerily vanished. After that, everyone became chaotic, each frantically searching for Luke, fearing that his fate would be the same as Nell's. At this moment, Stephen and their father sat in the car in silence. Hugh broke the silence first, asking why his relationship with his wife was strained. Upon hearing this, Stephen finally exploded in anger, furiously saying that he not only had to manage the household, but also had to take care of all his younger siblings. Yet everyone, including Hugh, didn't understand him. Later, feeling heavy and depressed, he knew there were many mental illnesses in the family, so he decided to get a vasectomy to avoid having children. His wife was furious upon learning this, blaming all their misfortunes on their father. It turned out that when their mother had mental issues, he thought they would soon move out of the castle. However, Hugh hired many contractors, Clearly, intending to renovate and continue living there, to make their emotionally unstable mother a bit happier, he found an old vanity to refurbish. He planned to give it to his mother after finishing. This item actually belonged to the former owner, Mary. However, after giving it to his mother, she appeared very happy, but the next second, Stephen saw his mother in this state and was even more convinced that she had a serious mental illness. Theo chased after Shirley to explain the situation with her brother-in-law, but Shirley didn't want to talk to her sister at all. She was about to kick her out when suddenly there was a loud knocking at the door. Both of them were startled and froze in place, as if the air had frozen in that moment. Fortunately, a phone ringing broke the tension. A bank representative said that her credit card had been maxed out. Shirley immediately asked for the location of the transaction. The representative said it was a gas station, and that gas station happened to be on the way to the castle. Realizing that Luke had gone to the castle, they hurriedly contacted the eldest brother. Upon learning this, the eldest brother immediately headed for the castle. Understanding that the situation was getting more serious, Hugh finally revealed the truth. He said that the castle could trap the souls of those who died inside, effectively allowing the souls to linger in the world. However, some souls would entice newcomers, tormenting them and causing mental issues. Then Hugh said he had read a novel that claimed he had hired someone to renovate the castle, but he had never actually done that. Moreover, there were no lounge rooms or studies in the castle. Everything was the castle's doing. So Hugh actually knew everything. But in order to prevent the children from being ensnared by the castle's curse, he chose to say nothing and left with them overnight. However, it seemed that simply leaving wouldn't solve the problem. At the same time, Shirley and Theo were also driving to the castle, but along the way, the two of them kept arguing. Although there was a minor incident, fortunately, neither of the two was injured. At this moment, Shirley was finally able to listen to Theo's explanation. She said that after touching Nell, her abilities suddenly disappeared. She couldn't accept the reality for a moment, so she hid in the storage room, drinking alone and crying. Her brother-in-law came over to comfort her. Luke entered the castle and poured several buckets of gasoline. Then he threw out a lighter, preparing to set the castle on fire. Their mother suddenly appeared, and for some unknown reason, the flames went out. 20 years ago, when the whole family had just moved in, Olivia often experienced hallucinations after moving in. One day, she walked into the kitchen to get some tea. As soon as she entered, she saw several little ones arguing animatedly. She hurried over to stop the children and then said she was going back to the study. But the children looked confused, not understanding what she was talking about, because there was no study in the house at all. At this moment, Olivia walked into the so-called study, only to find she was in a morgue, with Nell's body right in front of her. She was so frightened that she kept backing away. Unexpectedly, she tripped over the body of Luke. Suddenly, Nell sat up abruptly.
Mommy!
Olivia was so scared that she collapsed on the ground. When she focused again, she realized she was back in the study. That night, Olivia woke up from her dream, and when she looked up, she saw a woman standing by the window. It was the former owner of the castle, Mary. Mary took her to the study and told her that everything here was an illusion. If she didn't break through this illusion quickly, her children would be trapped here forever, suffering nightmares worse than death. Immediately after, Olivia witnessed the crooked neck lady and Mr. Giant, and believed Mary's words. When she learned that the way to break the illusion was through death, she looked for a screwdriver, planning to save Hugh first. But before she could act, someone discovered her. Later, she went to comfort Nell to sleep. Nell begged her to get rid of the crooked neck lady. Just at this moment, Stephen suddenly walked in. Magically, the night instantly turned into day. Stephen excitedly pulled her, showing her a vanity mirror covered with photos.
Mommy?
From that moment on, Mary continually clung to Olivia, incessantly manipulating her. Eventually, Olivia was successfully persuaded. One day, Olivia called all the children over to her, but strangely, Luke had inexplicably turned into a girl named Lily. However, Olivia thought that the illusion was already bizarre, so it was normal for there to be some issues, so she had the children drink milk with additives. Lily picked up the cup and drank it all in one gulp, but soon, she began to foam at the mouth and fainted. At this moment, the remaining children were also getting ready to drink. Suddenly, Hugh rushed in and pushed Olivia aside. Then he took the children and got them into the car. At this moment, Mary was still bewitching Olivia, urging her to quickly chase after and kill her husband. Just then, Mrs. Hope suddenly spoke up, warning Olivia not to listen to Mary, saying that Mary wanted to kill everyone, pulling them all down to accompany her in death. Olivia was hesitating at this moment when Hugh escaped with Stephen. Olivia's mind completely shattered, but Mary was still there, fanning the flames. In the end, Olivia chose to end her own life. At this moment, Stephen and Hugh had already entered the castle. Hugh saw that the floor was covered in gasoline and immediately understood that this was all the work of Luke. He recalled the eerie red door in the castle and urged Stephen to catch up with him. But just a few steps later, he heard strange noises. Stephen quickly turned back to check on the situation. He could only pretend that he saw nothing. Then he ran to catch up with his father. Hugh reached out and held him back. Stephen looked ahead and was surprised to see Lily, the little girl, sitting there. Suddenly, Hugh told Stephen not to move, looking at himself. The next second, thankfully, Mr. Giant didn't attack but turned and left. Afterward, Hugh quickened his pace and arrived at the red door. But he used all his strength and still couldn't open the door, so he ran to the side to look for tools. At this moment, Stephen followed him, but he discovered that Luke was in a room. He walked inside. Then, Stephen returned to his own home. His pregnant wife greeted him, happily showing him her baby bump.
Like your mother?
Stephen was so startled that he didn't know how to react. Suddenly, Nell appeared, reaching out to touch his forehead and pulling him out of the illusion. But as soon as he came out, he saw his siblings lying haphazardly on the ground. At the same time, the castle also turned against Hugh, causing mold to grow all over his body. Shirley and Theo also entered the castle. Theo heard her father's cries and dashed upstairs, just as she was about to seek help from her sister. Shirley heard her sister's calls, but at this moment, she couldn't care about anyone else, because she had already been pulled into the illusion. In the illusion, it was a bar. Once, Shirley had lost control and betrayed her husband. The next second, she found herself in a funeral parlor. She looked at her own body lying in the coffin, bewildered. Suddenly, the corpse sat up abruptly. Shirley was nearly driven to collapse by fear. Suddenly, Nell appeared and saved her. When Shirley woke up, she saw her eldest brother rescuing Luke. Meanwhile, Theo, possessing abilities, had been unable to find anyone who understood her, until a woman appeared, and the two quickly fell in love. However, the next second,
No.
Nell appeared and reached out to help. Now everyone had escaped the illusion, only Luke remained trapped. Unable to extricate himself, he saw his long-lost mother, and she brought him a gentleman's hat. He was about to reach out to take it when suddenly, Nell told him to run. He remembered that his sister had also warned him while in rehab. Finally, guided by Nell, he successfully escaped the illusion. At this moment, Nell's ghost appeared and said that all of this was the work of the castle and the former owner. This was a cursed room, which had once been the mother's study, Stephen's activity room, Shirley's lounge, Theo's exercise room, Luke's treehouse for painting, and Nell's toy room. Although Nell had already passed away, she had been traveling through different illusionary spaces to save her brothers and sisters. Just then, Hugh finally woke up, but standing beside him was Mary. Mary still wanted to incite him to kill everyone, but Olivia suddenly came over. Mary left the stage for her. Olivia wanted to persuade her husband not to take the children away, but to her surprise, Hugh said that the children had grown up. They needed a broader world. In the end, Olivia was persuaded to help open the red door. Then, Stephen and others immediately dragged Luke toward the hospital. Suddenly, Hugh called Stephen to stop, stating that he could finally reveal the truth. It turned out that Hugh took the children to a safe place and then hurried back to the castle to find his wife. But it was already too late. At that time, the gardener and the nanny rushed to the castle anxiously, saying that their daughter had secretly run away. But when they saw Lily's body on the ground, the two collapsed and cried. Hugh felt that this harmful castle must be destroyed and planned to burn it down. But the gardener pleaded with him not to do that, because even if they became ghosts, they wanted to come back to see their children. Afterward, Hugh buried this secret deep in his heart and carefully nurtured the children to grow up. Once Stephen learned the whole story, he finally understood the difficulties his father faced. At this moment, he noticed many medications scattered on the ground. It turned out that Hugh had thrown away blood pressure medication to save the children. Then, Hugh's spirit opened the red door. Then, the eldest brother walked alone towards the castle door, looking at the countless ghosts around him. He paused for only 2 seconds before walking out. After that, everyone's lives finally returned to normal. The gardener brought his wife to the castle, and his wife left this world happily. At this moment, the gardener looked to the side and saw his wife and 2 children standing ahead. The family of 4 was finally reunited. The film comes to an end here. This film was produced by Netflix, ranking 6th in the global trending TV shows at the time. The film constantly switches between 2 timelines, past and present, with a plot that is quite intricate and rich. The setup of the room behind the red door is very innovative, as it reflects the inner world of each character. Although the children escaped the castle, fear followed them like a shadow, and their emotional knots and shadows lingered on, which became their everlasting scars. They were then haunted by their deepest fears. Fortunately, by the end, the family, after experiencing suspicion and blame, shows forgiveness, reconciliation, and redemption. In the end, they worked together to bravely conquer their fears. Everyone welcomed a fulfilling conclusion. Stephen no longer worried about the family's history of mental illness. He and his wife opened their hearts, seeking forgiveness, and finally welcomed the fruit of their love. Shirley had always felt guilty about her infidelity, but after confessing to her husband, the heavy burden in her heart was finally lifted. Theo was no longer troubled by her special abilities. Luke successfully kicked his drug habit and began to live well. Moreover, there were many small details in the movie that had gone unnoticed before. At that time, Luke painted a picture in the treehouse, and the woman in the painting had a horrifying expression, wearing a pink dress. Later, when Stephen returned home, he saw Nell's ghost, who made the same expression as the one in the painting, and the dress she wore, while dancing before her death, was also pink. Audiences who appreciate details were pleasantly surprised by this. Most importantly, all the plot holes in the film were filled in. Each character in the film had a distinct personality, reflecting the various mental struggles of modern individuals. For example, issues like childbirth, marriage, drug addiction, sexual orientation, and life and death. The film extensively escalated the conflicts arising from these issues, providing a solid foundation for the emotional redemption that followed. However, the film also has its fair share of criticisms, such as the ghosts in the film lacking real threat. Moreover, at the beginning, several children claimed there were ghosts in the house. If only one child had said that, it would be understandable, but the fact that several children said it was crucial. The mother herself had special abilities, yet she still didn't believe in ghosts and didn't hurry to move away, which really seemed absurd. If you enjoy my channel, please subscribe to my it. Your support is the greatest encouragement for me.